Hello and welcome to Small Shifts, Big Impact, Practical Strategies for Neurodiversity-Affirming Classrooms, presented by Amanda Morin, who I'm so lucky to say I know her in real life. I'm Megan Gross, SIP Program Support Specialist, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for this breakout session. I'm a white, middle-aged woman with shoulder-length brown hair, blue eyes, wearing a blue t-shirt. I'm twinning with Amanda today, and in front of a Zoom background that is teal, white, and blue. A few logistics for this session. This will be recorded and archived on the conference agenda page after the conference for 1 month. And then afterwards, it will be on our SIP Impact website. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the closed captioning button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The interpretation icon in the same area will provide access to Spanish translation. We will ensure that the ASL interpreters are spotlighted along with the presenter and presentation. Please ensure your volume is muted to avoid background distractions while presenters speak. We encourage you to engage with others in the chat, and when possible, keep your camera on so we can see your faces. And with that, Amanda, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm Amanda Morin, as Megan said. I am also a middle-aged white woman. I am wearing the same blue t-shirt that Megan described. I have short, ear-length red hair with blue streaks, and I'm in front of the same teal background. I'm about to share my screen so that that background will change for you. Please don't hesitate to put questions in the chat. I'm really excited to have all these conversations with you today and to include you in this conversation. So give me just 1 minute as I share, because I can't talk and share at the same time. It's an executive functioning issue on my part. So give me just 1 moment. Okay. Give me 1 moment. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. We are talking about small shifts making big impacts and practical strategies for neurodiversity affirming classrooms. And I very specifically use the phrase neurodiversity affirming, and I'll get into that in a little bit because I want to make sure you understand what I mean when I say neurodiversity affirming. I love this slide because it has the best picture of me. I don't look like this all the time, so I love being able to show you my Meet the Presenter slide. You see a picture of me all dressed up with purple hair. In the background is some beautiful foliage. I am, in my day job, I'm the Director of Academic Services at Compass High School in Belmont, California. I'm also a speaker, a PBS Difference Maker Award honoree, author of a number of books on life skills, special education, and neurodiversity. And my latest book that I think is applicable to this is Neurodiversity Affirming Schools, Transforming Practices so all students feel accepted and supported. Please don't hesitate to converse with others in the chat and share any practices along the way that you have found helpful. I will also note that I myself am neurodivergent, so you may not see me making direct eye contact with the camera because it distracts me. It's not that I'm not paying attention to you, it's that I'm paying attention to what I need to do to have this conversation with you today. So because I am a teacher first and foremost, I want to make sure we're talking about the outcomes that I'm hoping that you come away with from this session. The first is I really want you to think about ways we can normalize support so all students are able to access learning. And of course, because you need something practical to take away, we're going to talk about practical changes to communications, routines, and expectations that can reduce barriers in masking. And I'll define masking in just a minute. And as always, I think we all think very hard about being relationship-centered with our students. And I just want to talk a little bit more about what kinds of strategies can support those relationships. What kind of language can we use to create safer and more supportive relationships for our students? So what does this actually mean, right? What this means is when we make small shifts in our practices and our languages, it really changes things for all the students in our classrooms, not just some of the students. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, because when we are talking about strategies to support students, we're not just looking at students who have individualized education programs. We're not just looking at students who have 504 plans. We're not just looking at students who we know have needs that we need to meet. We're looking at all students, how they can best engage with each other and with ourselves in our classroom, because that's what builds a sense of belonging. I want to take a minute and talk to you about neurodiversity affirming. This is not on this slide, it was on the previous slide. But I want to take a moment to say, when I talk about neurodiversity, I'm talking about minds of all kinds. So when I'm talking about neurodiversity affirming practice today, I'm going to give you conversation about specific strategies that support some of your neurodivergent minds, but also thinking about all of the minds in your classroom. How can we make sure that the classroom welcomes everybody and meets them where they're at? That's a big task, but we're going to try and take some of that on today. Those small shifts matter, right? Because our students don't struggle because they lack the ability to succeed. They struggle because of environmental barriers. Now, not all environments have barriers, and to some degree, that depends on how we can control the environment. I mentioned to you that I today coming to you as my neurodivergent self, and I've controlled my environment. The noise is not as loud as I usually have it. I have fidgets next to me, so you'll see me fidgeting. The lights are down. I'm able to function as my best productive self because I have changed my environment to meet the needs of the neurotype, the mind that I have. And that's supports. It just sounds like supports. We often talk about supports and think big accommodations, big things, but little things reduce those barriers. I feel like I belong in this Zoom room today as a learner and as a teacher because I can fit myself within the environment instead of having difficulty trying to fit into this environment. So I want to take a moment and reflect on language. And I think this is important when we talk about neurodivergent students. As educators, we have and clinicians and practitioners, we are often taught to use person-first language. So person-first language is a child with autism, a learner with ADHD, a student with dyslexia. There's also identity-first language. And identity-first language is when we say an autistic student, a dyslexic learner, or sometimes you'll hear students refer to themselves as an ADHDer, right? That's identity-first language. And I would love to see you drop into the chat which you use, and just knowing there's no judgment, no right or wrong answers. I'm just trying to get a gauge on where people are. I'm going to take a moment and look at the chat. Person first. Person first. Okay. Great answers. I see them rolling in. I really appreciate that. Some of the answers that I see are exactly what I try to do in my work is I ask the person first. And I'm not, which sounds funny, I don't ask them to be person first. I ask them before I refer to them. In my household is an identity first household. And that's just because we feel like we can't separate out our neurology from the way we have become into our being. But I just want to be really clear in saying it's worth having that conversation if your learners are old enough to have that conversation, or with parents too, to have that conversation and see how they prefer to talk about their students. So along the way today, you may hear me use identity first language. It's not because I am ignoring the person first language. It's because that's how I use it when I'm talking about myself and the learners in my classroom who prefer that. Let's do a little level setting on language across the board. Language matters. The way we talk about students matters, not just because of being concise or precise, but because it sets the tone in our classrooms, right? It sets the tone in our rooms and for our learners about how do we acknowledge who they are? How do we talk about how they show up? And how are we not imparting judgment through the words that we use? So when I talk about neurodiverse and neurodivergent, I mean this very specifically. This graphic always surprises people because I always say to people, 10 out of 10 people are neurodiverse and approximately 2 out of 10 people are neurodivergent. And we often hear the terms neurodiversity and neurodivergence used interchangeably, but they're not. So if there's anything you walk away with today, I want to actually share with you why I use them differently. When we talk about neurodiversity, we are talking about all spaces, all people. You can compare this to biodiversity, for example. If you think about plants and animals and all things that you find in nature, They have diversity across the board. I, about a year ago, moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. There are plants and animals here that would not thrive in Maine where I lived before. There were no palm trees in Maine. There are palm trees outside my house now. It doesn't mean palm trees are better or pine trees are better. It means that they thrive in different environments. But that's biodiversity. Mines are the same way. All mines thrive in different ways. And that's neurodiversity. The minds in our classroom as a whole is neurodiverse. Neurodivergent is when we are talking about minds that may in some way differ from what we expect. And I want to be really clear in saying differ from what we expect, because we do have expectations. It doesn't mean that neurodivergent minds are wrong in any kind of way. It means that the way that they are wired, the neurotype may interfere with communication. It may interfere with processing information. It may interfere with sensory differences. There may be ways that it interferes with the environment that makes it harder for our students to learn in the environments that they're in. I'm going to pause for a minute and make sure we don't have questions about that, because I think it's an important point. And I'm rolling through the chat pretty quickly. And I do think it's important to note, if you use the words interchangeably, you're also not wrong. You're still learning, right? That's one of the great things about what we do is we continue to learn, we continue to make changes, and this evolves over time, right? This has evolved over time. When I first started this work, neurodivergence was not the term, but it's been a term that has been claimed by our community in a way that I feel the need to honor as we have these conversations. So as we continue talking about language, I want to challenge you to really start thinking about, what is your lens on language? How do you talk about students? How do you talk about the things you see in your classrooms or in your homes or in your practices? Oftentimes we think of behavior, and I always hear it when people say behavior, I hear it bolded and italicized, behavior. But then if I take a step back, I think about behavior with quotation marks. You'll see me making quotation marks with my fingers. Because if you really stop and take a really good look at what we're talking about when we talk about behavior, it's often thought of as negative. But behavior truly is a reaction or an action to something that's happening. So if we neutralize that, it gives us an opportunity to look at our students in more affirming ways. So I can say I'm happy for you all to also use the icons if you want to give me a thumbs up, a heart, or anything along the way. If I say anything that resonates with you, or if I ask a question, if you don't want to drop anything into the chat. I want to know how many of us have used the phrase misbehaving or the phrase acting out. I will put my thumbs up for both of those. When I first started teaching, those are phrases that I used until I learned I didn't want to be using them anymore. We talk sometimes about students who decided to do a thing, or they chose to, or they chose not to. And oftentimes we say, kids are just looking for attention. All of which can be true. But sometimes if we stop and think about how we phrase those things, it gives us new ways to look at our students. So instead of saying that our student is acting out or misbehaving, what if we tried saying the student is struggling with the directions? They are struggling to follow the procedures or policies or routines that we've put in place. Or instead of acting out, they're reacting to something. And the most important thing to remember is sometimes we don't know what they're reacting to. And so we need to ask them, what is happening? Can you tell me more about why you are upset, why you are frustrated, why you are? So asking those questions. And also thinking about what our students need and are unable to do. And I say unable to, and I would like to add the word yet, right? Because I think we always need to think about the yet. When we look at what students are reacting to or how they are showing us that they are struggling, it's always important to look at what is the underlying skill that is missing so we can help them learn to do this differently. And then I always change the phrase of attention to connection. And I like the best example I have of this is when I first started my career, I taught kindergarten, which most people will either say "aw" or "oh" to. I think like there's a divide between kindergarten teachers and other teachers. I loved teaching kindergarten. One year, I had a little girl in my classroom who would not let go of my leg. She would like come along with me when I walked across the classroom. And at the beginning of the year, she was just attached to my leg. I had another teacher who said to me, "You can't let her do that. She's just looking for attention." And I thought about it and I thought about it and I said, yes, she is looking for attention, but she's also looking for connection. She's looking for a way to feel safe and like she belongs. So eventually, she and I, this little girl and I, worked out a way where if I had to move 2 desks away, she could still see me and she knew I was still there and she could come back and check in with me. Over time, she realized that her connection stayed even if it wasn't literally connected to me. And so I think it's important to realize that when students are looking for attention, they're also looking for connection. So I want to like rephrase that language for you a little bit. The reason I talk about changing our lens on language, excuse me, is because when we move from that deficit-based lens to a more neutral lens, or even strength-based, which is the best possible lens, we are much more likely to see possibilities instead of problems. Our language, when we say somebody is acting out, sets us up to look at it as a problem. When we say a student is reacting to something, we see a possibility of removing something that they could be reacting to in order to make it better for them and for the classroom as a whole. Our language shapes belonging. How you talk about kids and with kids shapes belonging. It signals whether they are safe in our presence. It reduces shame. Our students, especially our neurodivergent students, they come to the table with their own language about themselves, their own ideas, their own conversations about themselves. And if we give them the opportunity to reframe that narrative, they're going to stop thinking that they're lazy, they're not smart enough, they're not able to keep up. So when we neutralize, we are really helping them change the narrative about themselves and build trust in the people who are around them. Trust in turn supports engagement, right? That's what we really are hoping for is engaged learners, learners who feel like they belong in our classrooms, and that affirming way of talking with them and not just about them makes a big difference. I will just make a quick aside here. When I talk about talking with children, I find that really important. I think it is a really important thing to remember that even when students are outside of our sight, they should be foremost in our mind. I don't think it is beneficial for us to talk about students without taking into perspective what they are thinking or what they need as well. It shifts us to thinking about how are we supporting all of these minds? How are we thinking about all students as important to us? How are we reducing the us versus them, your kids versus my kids kinds of paradigms that exist in education spaces? Okay, take a pause. And that brings me to the conversation about barriers. I said before that there are barriers, but I really want to make it clear that I am not talking about barriers that you are deliberately putting into place, because I do not think that we are putting barriers into place deliberately for students. I think there are unintentional barriers that come with systems. But the important thing here is to realize once we make the small shift to thinking about barriers being systems based and not student based, so that we look at barriers as inherent in the environment and not traits of the student, we are going to actually be able to make some of those small shifts in ways that support our students. Things, for example, like rigid expectations. And I say rigid, but I also just mean set expectations, right? Expectations that don't necessarily flex to the needs of students. For example, when students line up in a line, if you have a student who feels very crowded and very uncomfortable in between two other people and they're pushing and they're shoving and they're moving their elbows around, it's not the student that's problematic. It is the expectation they are supposed to be standing in this particular setting that is difficult for them, that makes it difficult for them. So if we think about how could we change that expectation, could that student be at the front of the line? Could they be at the back of the line? Could they walk behind the rest of the class? How can we change those expectations so we don't look at this as a student-based issue? Things like unclear routines are very difficult for many people, but definitely for our neurodivergent students. And I know that when we work in schools, especially during what I call May Mayhem, not Maycember, but May Mayhem, it feels like that to me, everything changes, right? There are all sorts of things going on. But if we can share how those routines are going to change as much as possible, it's going to support all of our students in understanding what comes next. What happens first? What's the first and the then? Punitive responses to stress are sometimes unintentional classroom barriers. And what I mean by this is when we see, and I'm going to do the quotation marks again, behavior that is stress-induced behavior from students, anxiety behavior, behavior that is because they don't know what to do. We can't punish skills into being, right? We are not able to say, you are losing this, you have to do this in order to teach a skill. So I think in order to think about how we make small shifts in our responses, thinking about the fact that you can have consequences for a student and still continue to teach them skills that makes them able to respond in different ways. And then sometimes we misinterpret distress as defiance, right? I have a number of students who just shut completely down, or they melt down, or they have big reactions that I don't understand. When I look at that and I would say, you are being defiant, you're being disruptive, I'm missing the fact that they are in some sort of distress. And I will be honest with you in saying that there are days where I do that in my own classroom and then I have to go back. And what I tell my kids all the time is I'm rewinding. I'm hitting the rewind button. I'm going back and I am time traveling in order to say to you, I misinterpreted that. Let's talk about this again. So I just, that's a little thing that I say to people all the time is kids love the idea of time travel. And if you can time travel to repair something, it's always a great opportunity for them to see you modeling that you didn't understand something and you're coming back to it. So as we talk about these small shifts, right? I love this image of this tangled up way of getting places and then a more direct route, right? Because if we think about these small shifts that can reduce barriers, when you clarify expectations, you're making it much easier. You're giving a much more direct way to things. Using visuals and routines, this visual in itself is a great way of showing you that there is more than one way to do things, right? You can cut through the mess or you can go through the messy way. Either way will get you from A to B, but it depends on how your mind works, right? For some people, going all the way through the squiggles and the lines is actually how they get there. But we have to respond with curiosity to our students and offer those flexible pathways to really understand what's going to help them and what's going to reduce those barriers for them. And that brings me to a conversation about executive functioning skills in neurodivergent learners. Now, executive functioning skills, I have one really, really somewhat of a joke around executive functioning skills. So if you're in this field, you will love my joke. If you don't love my joke, I'm okay with that too. How does an executive function? Anyone want to answer that one? How does an executive function? With an executive assistant. So with assistance, right? Okay, really bad joke. But the point is we need to provide assistance to help our students function executively. I see some smiley faces. I appreciate that. Thank you. Not a great joke. It's the only one I had though. But if we think about executive functioning skills in our neurodivergent learners, this image where you have this person hiding under their desk with piles of things on top of the desk and strewn all around them is how I think about it when we don't support students with executive functioning or any learners, to be honest, right? Some of our teachers need support too, because when we are trying to access learning, we need to be able to understand where we're starting. We need to get through those piles first. We need to help students figure out where to even begin. Because executive function is how we start tasks. It's how we stay organized. It's how we manage time. It's how we regulate emotion and attention. And it's how we follow through on plans. And I really want to be clear in saying that these are skills that impact how students access learning and not whether or not they can learn. So when we think about executive function skills and supporting our neurodivergent and neurodiverse learners, it's not about thinking about whether or not they're going to be able to learn. It's about thinking about how do we put things into place so they can learn. This picture may just be a selfie of me at my desk on any given day, but I cannot confirm that. I'm just going to say it could be. But executive functioning skills in action. If you think about this beautiful picture of a symphony, sometimes we think about a symphony or a quartet and they're in perfect unison and they work beautifully together, but they don't start out that way. When you go to a symphony or you go to a concert, the first thing you hear is all of the instruments tuning and they're all out of sync, right? So when you first hear them, they're completely out of sync and they're discordant and they're not working well together. And that's the way I think sometimes about our students is at first, their executive functioning skills are not working well together. And as we teach them more skills, they start playing this beautiful, beautiful song together. But it takes some time to get there. And some of those skills that take time to get there, I just wanted to name them because I say it out loud as though I think that everybody knows them, but I think it's important to really name what I'm talking about. I'm talking about planning, knowing what to do first. I'm talking about the ability to hold on to information, that working memory, the task initiation of getting started, the sustained attention of staying focused, the cognitive flexibility of shifting when you need to make changes to your plan, organization, which is not just about managing materials, it's also about managing ideas and managing projects, and self-monitoring, noticing how things are going, paying attention to all that. If you look at this list, I would be curious to know how many of you feel like you can do all of this well on any given day together, all of these things. I would not include myself in that. I think there are days when I'm really on and all of these are working well together. And then I have days when some of them are not working well together. And it's important for us to remember that as educators, because if we are expecting this for our students, we need to understand that it's going to fluctuate over time, not just for them, but for us too. That there will be days where my ability to flex cognitively is going to be tough. My ability to notice how things are going might not be my best. Definitely, there are days when my working memory is not what I expect it to be. If you've ever experienced that moment where you walk into a room and forget why you're there, that's a difficulty with your working memory. Sometimes going backwards and trying again will help, but sometimes it won't. So just knowing that these are things that are in flux on any given day. And I want to talk a little bit about what that means in terms of how we support students, right? Because a lot of times I have conversations with teachers about accommodating and enabling. And I think what's important to know is when we talk about accommodating, sometimes people will say that's just too much work. Why am I accommodating for a student? But the part that I want to talk about is what happens when we don't bring students into that conversation about accommodations, right? Accommodations provide us the opportunity to build independence. They provide us the opportunity to help students realize that there are ways that they can support themselves in learning and making learning more accessible. The best practices for accommodations is bringing students into the process because, if you have a student who struggles to see the board, if you say to them, well, just try harder in seeing, it's not going to work. But they might want to move closer. They might need to have the information in front of them. It's important for them to know what's going to support them. When I think about the difference between accommodating and enabling, is I think about enabling as putting things into place without student involvement. It's like we're running all around behind the scenes and we're trying to figure out what's going to help them. We do the things to help the student, but they are not aware of it. When they're not aware of it, it limits their independence and it builds dependence. But when they are aware of it and you involve them in the conversation, it builds awareness of what they need. It teaches them ways to increase their autonomy. It gives them the opportunity to say to you, this is not something that's going to help me, but here's an idea of what will help me. And I think that's important because neurodivergence is a lifelong thing. You're always going to have to be self-aware. You're always going to be looking for accommodating yourself. And when those supports are something that you are aware of, you start putting them in place instead of expecting them to be in place for you. Okay. Let me take a moment. Excuse me. And I think that that means that we need to talk about all of the things we're doing, right? As we externalize support, it reduces cognitive load. It reduces the ability that we are putting on students to keep everything in their minds while they're also doing all of the things. It doesn't lower expectations. It makes those expectations reachable because students have their own solutions. Have you ever seen, kids who write things on their arm? Kids who will, put a sticky note down. Kids will put their hand up and they'll say, oh, 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 but they don't have a way of like keeping that in mind. The great thing about that is they've put their own solutions in place. The not so great thing about that is as soon as they wash their arm, their notes are gone. Or if they lose that sticky note, they don't have that thing. If they put their hand down, they may forget what they were doing, they wanted to say. Those are not sustainable solutions over time. So if we externalize supports and give them opportunities to choose things like visual schedules or checklists or timers or graphic organizers, when those supports are visible, they don't have to hold them in their memory, right? And it helps them drive their own decisions about what's going to work for them. These are small shifts that make a big difference. One thing I want to really make clear here, when I talk about checklists and step-by-step directions, I often have people say to me, well, aren't those just cheat sheets? And for a long time, I would sort of hem and haw and say, well, I guess, kind of, or maybe it's just giving them. And then I had a teacher one day say to me, I don't call them cheat sheets. I call them handy helpers. And I was like, that's it. We need to start calling these handy helpers. So if you take something away today, stop using the phrase cheat sheets and start calling them handy helpers. It makes everybody feel like they are more involved and that they're not doing anything wrong. And to that teacher, all these years later, thank you so much for changing my perspective on that. I love that so much. So when we're normalizing supports, we're taking away the opportunity to say this is an individual struggle. When you put supports in place for all students in your classroom, you are not calling out the students who are struggling because you're making them available to everyone. You build them into your classroom routines. You make them visible. You make them predictable. And when they're used without stigma, there are students who will take advantage of the supports that you have in place and you didn't even know that they needed them, right? Timers, fidgets, visuals, handy helpers. When you make those available to all students, it makes it easier for the students who really need to use them because they're not feeling like they're the only ones who are using them. And it supports students that you don't know needed support until you start supporting them. It's part of relationship-centered practice, right? We're talking about how do we build those connections with students because relationships are our foundation of access for our students. That connection, it supports regulation. It builds engagement, safety, and it reduces masking. When I talked earlier about masking, what I'm talking about is students who either take on the traits of other students so that they feel like they fit in better, or they are suppressing traits of their own that they feel like makes them stand out. And that is exhausting for students to do. And we want to make sure that we are reducing that for them. Externalizing those supports, as I said, reduces cognitive load, but it also makes expectations reachable. Now, I know a number of you are very aware of the I do, we do, you do framework, right? And for neurodivergent learners, it's important to remember their skills don't develop in isolation. They're co-learners before they're self-directed. And this is where this is a really powerful scaffold. And I think about this a lot when I think about this in terms of behavioral regulation and co-regulation and things like that. I do becomes the I, as a teacher, notice and name what's happening. And the goal is to build a shared vocabulary for that noticing. We do becomes we, learner and teacher, think about how it's going together with the goal of strengthening their reflective thinking, right? And then you do builds that place where the student is now like, I can choose, I can adjust. And it develops agency, it develops adaptability, and it develops self-trust. It's a great cycle to think about, not just in terms of imparting content, but also in terms of learning other skills. So let's look at Alex, okay? Alex is a first grade student. Alex experiences big feelings when things don't go as expected, and it makes it hard to stay engaged. So this metacognitive cycle, let's run through how this works and helping Alex notice, understand, and respond to their own needs. I love this picture too, this picture of a kid with a funnel with a light bulb on the top of their head. I have no idea why they have a funnel on top of their head with a light bulb, but it's just very intriguing to me as we look at this. So Alex, let's think about what I do looks like with Alex, okay? And the goal here is Alex isn't expected to fix anything on themselves yet. Alex is watching, they're listening and experiencing co-regulation, because when Alex starts beginning to look upset and when a game isn't going as well, the teacher's modeling out loud, naming what they see and feel without judgment, and shows a strategy. So for example, that might be, I'm noticing your body is wiggly. I see that this feels tricky for you. I see that your body is getting a little tense. So what's happening here is the teacher is helping Alex notice what it looks like for on the outside or even inside their body when things is difficult. And then the teacher shows a strategy. When my feelings start getting really big like that, I put my feet onto the floor and I take 3 slow breaths. Do you want to try that with me? And so you're co-regulating. It's the I do, I show it to you, and then you're going to try it together. And if that concrete strategy doesn't work, you can always move on to another one. We do would be your next step. And this is not all in one day. I want to be really clear. This is a process. It goes over time, right? Once Alex has gotten better at doing this with the teacher, you invite Alex into noticing and reflecting on their own to be able to notice and support and connect feelings to tools. Okay, so they're going to maybe have this visual menu of feelings chart or a strategy menu of things that Alex has tried and has been successful. So now Alex gets a little upset during this game, and the teacher, instead of saying, I noticed this, says, let's check in. How's your body feeling right now? What have you tried? Did the breathing help? Did it help a little bit? Did it help a lot? Is it not helping yet? Okay, if that didn't work for you, let's look at your menu together. What else can you try? What do you think your body needs right now? Should it be breathing? Do you need a ball to squeeze? Do you need a quiet break? And then they try that strategy together and reflect on it. How did that work for you? What did it change for you? So together, they're reflecting. So Alex is learning to notice with support and connecting the feelings to the tools that help. Eventually, we hope we're moving to a you do, right? The you do is where Alex is beginning to initiate this himself. Alex is saying, I'm frustrated. I need the calm corner. I'm going to squeeze that stress ball. I have one right here, the stress ball. I'm going to squeeze that stress ball. And what we have done is moved from a place where the teacher notices to where they work together to where the teacher is simply just reinforcing Alex's ability to regulate. And if something doesn't work, they're able to just pop in and try and suggest something different. And to be able to reinforce how well Alex is doing in this cycle, to be able to say, like, you noticed that yourself and you chose something to help. That's awesome. You're using your tools. But also to just say, like, hey, that didn't seem to work very well. What else do you want to try? And it gives autonomy to Alex. I go through this entire example because I think it's important for us to realize that I do, we do, you do is not just for imparting content. It is also something we can do when we're teaching kids how to use regulation strategies, how to improve executive functioning strategies, and how to become really good advocates for their own needs. Okay, I'm going to take a pause and peek at the chat for a second. Okay. I'm going to go through some rapid fire neurodiversity affirming strategies, and then we'll take a few moments for questions if we can. And I call this rapid fire because I think, like, at the end of this, I want you to walk away with like 3 to 5 things you can try in your classroom tomorrow, or 1. It doesn't matter, 3 to 5 or 1. When we're talking about a kid who is struggling with task initiation, the ability to get started on something, here's one I love, the 3-minute rule. If this task is overwhelming, ask the child to commit to 3 minutes of focused work to build momentum. 3 minutes, just say, we're just going to do this for 3 minutes. The thing about using this strategy is if after 3 minutes a student doesn't feel like they can continue, you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay to say, okay, we're going to walk away from this and we'll try again at a different time. But a lot of times that 3 minutes is enough to get a student's brain engaged in the activity and they keep moving. So the 3-minute rule is a great task initiation one. When you have prioritization, try first then statements. It encourages kids to frame tasks as this is what I need to do, and then I get to do this, right? So it's first I do this, and then I do this. It reinforces, wow, reinforces their ability to sequence and their ability to prioritize. And it also gives them the opportunity to realize that there's something beyond just this moment and this task. First, I put away all of my things, then I get to go outside for recess. First, I finish my math, then I can go to lunch, right? There are all these different things. Or even first, I get out my materials, then I get started on the project. It gives them an idea of how do you get moving, how do you get prioritized, and how do you sequence. For prioritizing, you can also do the sticky note brain dump. If you write each task on a sticky note and you arrange them by priority to help with organization, in my classroom, I always have different color sticky notes, and my students have learned to put each task on a different color, and then they can rearrange them as they want to see if the same colors make it easier for them to understand how they do this. Or sometimes they'll rearrange each other's sticky notes, but it gives them an opportunity to say, once this is done, I can take the sticky note off the board and it's done. And it helps them prioritize and organize. Again, for task initiation, I love this one. My co-author, Emily Kircher Morris, taught me this one, and I'm just going to shout this to the wind. It's beautiful. Decision dice. So if you notice here, these are dice that you would use with a Dungeons and Dragons. They have multiple faces, not just four. You assign each thing that a kid has to do a number, and you roll the dice, or you have the student roll the dice. And whatever number that dice lands on, that's the activity that they have to do. It takes the decision out of your hands, it takes the decision out of the student's hands, and it just says, this is the number, that's the one that came up. I love this so much because it makes it easier to say, all of this has to get done, but it doesn't matter in what order it has to get done. Then we're talking about sustained attention, task batching. I was sort of talking about this a little bit with the sticky notes, but if you group similar tasks together, and I think we do this as adults, we start thinking about, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to reply to all my emails, or I'm going to finish writing this piece of my presentation, and then I'm going to do the notes for it. Grouping similar tasks together can make it seem less overwhelming and make it easier to get through one chunk of things for students. Externalizing time is really good for time estimation. Visual timers, countdowns, alarms, it makes it more concrete and visible to students. I would say, though, make sure you know what your students' stamina and ability to handle watching time count down is, because for some kids that can cause more anxiety when they're looking at it and saying, I only have this amount of time. It's kind of like when you can't sleep at night and you look at the clock and you're like, I only have 5 hours until I have to get up. I only have 3 hours until I have to get up. Oh my gosh, I have to get up in 2 hours. When some kids see the time going down, it actually makes it harder for them to get started and keep moving. But sometimes it's easier for them. That's why alarms help sometimes too. This one's a great one for organization, the 2-minute tidy. If you set a timer for 2 minutes and you're like, okay, we're going to clean up my workspace, your workspace, you have 2 minutes. But please, if you're going to do a 2-minute tidy, make sure you explain what a clean workspace looks like before you get started, because otherwise you're just going to have things flying across the room. I will often say to kids, okay, we're going to do a 2-minute tidy. And that means at the end of that 2 minutes, your papers are all going to be stacked together. Your phones are going to be put in the phone cubby. Your backpacks are going to be zipped up and nobody's going to be tripping over them. And you're going to be looking at me or looking in the direction of where the board is so you're ready to learn. I'm going to take a pause because I'm going to give you an opportunity to chime in just a minute. I've gone through this very, very quickly. I am incredibly grateful to the ASL interpreters whose hands must be flying and moving really fast here because I talked more quickly than I intended to. But I wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to talk with me a little bit too here. I just want to talk about sort of the key takeaways and how this all ties together, right? We talked about the outcomes. We talked about how do we externalize support? How do we make sure that we're meeting all the minds in our classrooms? How are we putting into place strategies that can support the executive functioning of our students? And I want to boil it down a little bit for you. When we normalize supports, when we put these rapid fire strategies into place, When we think about changing our language and neutralizing the language and moving from deficits-based to strength-based, making those tools available to everyone, we are making it okay to have different types of minds in our classroom. When we reduce barriers by clarifying routines and expectations in our language, we are making it easier for students to show up in the ways that they need to show up in order to be successful. And all of this put together, affirming language, connecting relationships, normalizing supports, reducing barriers, that is how we build a classroom of belonging. It's how we make the start of building a classroom of belonging. It's how we realize that everybody has a place in our classrooms and everybody can show up and give their best and show what they know. So I want to take a moment and have you think about this. And I'm going to check the chat here too. I'm wondering what one small shift you will try in the next few weeks as school sort of winds down for the year. What barrier can you reduce? What support can you put into place? Or what relationship practice can you strengthen? Just take a moment and set one action that you're going to take this week. And I'm going to check in the chat and see what is it. Clarify, reteach, reword, highlight. Excellent. These are great. Normalize taking mental health walks. I love that. Rewording. Remind myself we're all trying our best. I just said that to my teachers the other day. Modeling inclusivity, connection over I do, we do. These are great. These are great. I love this. Now, I did notice in the chat too that there was a question before about when you're working with other teachers and about providing access to tools, but when kids aren't using the tools. I think it's important. I want to just name this. So when you have a student who isn't using the tools that you're providing to them, there are a couple of things that I would say. The first is ask the student why they don't want to use the tool, right? Is it because it makes them feel uncomfortable? Is it because they don't know how to use the tool? Is it because it isn't actually the right tool for the situation? But I think part of this question was about how do you work with a teacher who doesn't know how to do that? And I think that's the same thing. Is I think it's about sitting down with your co-teacher and saying, let's figure out with this student together why they're not using this tool. What else could we try? What isn't working? How could we make it less conspicuous? Because sometimes it's about being conspicuous. So I just wanted to go back to that and make sure that I was addressing that question. And I think also if the question is a teacher is feeling a little bit overwhelmed and saying like, but I'm giving them everything that they need and they're not using it, it's okay to say, let me help you with that. Let me help you show them how to use that tool. Let me help you think about other tools that might work. Let me think about what's worked with other kids who have similar difficulties in the past and what we've tried there. I'm still reading the chat on the things you're going to try. Wait time, I think, is perfect. Language building habits. Pausing before having courageous conversations with colleagues. I love that.
So I hope you get a chance before we close our session to see all the appreciation and love that is in the chat for you and all the new learning that all of us have experienced. I am putting in our conference survey for folks. As a reminder, your feedback is incredibly important. It's how we design our professional learning throughout the year, in addition to our conference. And also, if you do it, we will send you one of these cool t-shirts. So please make sure that you provide your feedback. Amanda, I want to thank you for spending time with us on a Friday afternoon. I think there was a lot of ahas with the rapid fire strategies and a lot of excitement around that. And I think also as teachers, right, making sure we're closing up these sessions with what can we do? So thank you for that practical strategies we can bring in Monday.
Absolutely. And I thank everybody for spending what may be your lunch hour on a Friday with me too. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to let everyone know that you can access the slides for Amanda's presentation today in the session description on the VFAIR's agenda page. If you have any additional questions about the conference, please visit the information booth. DJ B Diamond is going to have her final dance break of the conference, so please make sure to tune in for that. And then this will be followed by our closing keynote with Kanya Sesser. And Kanya Sesser, if you all haven't met her before, she is like the perfect pick-me-up, energetic individual to kick us off into the weekend. And so you don't want to miss it. So please tune in for that as well. Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you everyone for joining in today. Happy Friday.